Okay. So, I thought it would be nice to start off this series with a bit of an intro and the intention of what you're trying to create.
Okay. So one of the things that I think is helpful for people who are in the field of human-centered design, whether they're practitioners or leaders, is to have access to kind of unedited, raw experience of setting up those sorts of functions or being a practitioner or whatever. And having been doing human-centered design for a while, being the co-founder and CEO of Huddle, which has been around 10 years and stuff now, what we thought is we would create this kind of unedited video series where we just ask questions and I would answer them. And the whole point is that there's no rehearsal, there's no like I don't have any knowledge of the questions that you're going to ask, and we've called it unedited because it's literally just going to be completely unedited, and what comes out, and that's the offering to the community basically, and that's as far as the intention goes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And can you tell me a bit about your background?
Sure. So my background started off in sort of science, engineering. So I did biomedical engineering and I majored in neurosciences, and I studied the brain for a bit. Went to Japan, worked in a hospital, did a whole bunch of research, literally looking at the brain and how the brain worked, and have always been interested in the human in the system, whether it's a product or an organisation or a service. And then I did a PhD in human-centered design, and again I was working with like high-stress environments. I was working with improving situational awareness in pilots in, fighter planes, quite literally. There's a whole Top Gun story that goes with that, which we won't go into. And then worked in the automotive industry, on the supplier side and the assembler side. So I worked with Sumitomo for a while, then I worked at Ford, and then I was working with emerging tech in the Chief Technology Office at Telstra, where we established the Experience Design Group there, and then started Huddle in 2009, which is a while ago now. Yeah, so that's kind of so I have a very sort of multidisciplinary approach, I think, to design and human-centered design based on that. So my lens is quite specific to that experience.
Mm-hmm. And where do you see the most importance for your focus in the design industry at the moment?
Well, Huddle's actually going through a bit of a transformation, I guess is the best word. We're repivoting. I actually said to my co-founder that I feel like it's a refounding. So he's recently decided to step out of the business and pursue his third career, and so I'm stepping back in as the CEO, and with that a whole bunch of kind of fresh thinking has come. So I've been sort of focused on this human, and I've been doing some other projects sort of as myself, and there's lots of learnings that have come from that. So what I'm really sort of excited about at the moment is responding to the increasing maturity of the understanding of human-centered design, especially in the Australian market, and that people are now building that capability internally and establishing teams, both on sort of agency and client side in private and public industry, and really helping those teams set up in a really robust way. Because one of the things that I have seen in the time that we've been doing this work is sometimes those departments get established by people who are super passionate about the customer and know that it's essential to care about the people that the organisation's ultimately in service of, but perhaps have not necessarily come from a background in human-centred design and that sort of thing. So the design practice is something that they need to learn pretty quickly to be able to establish those departments, and all of the things that actually wrap around the doing of human-centred design as well, like how do you communicate the value of working in this way to people who just don't necessarily see the value, and what does your founding team look like? Who do you start with? What are the skills that you need? What sort of mindsets do we need to foster? And so there's sort of focus on helping people establish like the foundational capabilities, but then also what I'm particularly interested in is what do high performing human-centered design teams look like, or what do high performing creative teams look like? On the back of the talk that I gave at SD now on sort of flow states and ecstasis and all that kind of stuff, I'm really excited to put all that in practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And what advice?
Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
What advice would you give to someone who's just starting to build up their design team?
I think the first thing that I would say, and I'm speaking to those people that have found themselves in the position where either they've been given the job that they've been wanting to have for ages, but now that they've got it, they're kind of like, holy shit, where do I start?
Yeah.
Right? And for those people, I would say it's absolutely okay to not have all of the answers, and it's okay to not know where to start, and it's okay to feel like you're pushing uphill, because in Australia at least, if you're in a large organisation that's still geared towards the sort of 20th century model of growth and profit and that sort of thing, getting the value conversation around spending time understanding customers, using the insights to inform decisions around strategy and organisational structure and service portfolio design and all of that sort of stuff is still a hard slog. So if you're feeling, oh, this is really hard, I think it's okay to feel that. I also think that there's a whole bunch of really great material that's out there for free that you should totally dive into and absorb. And we might put a list of stuff. Can we do that?
Yeah.
We might put a list of resources in the whatever that is, but we'll do that.
Yeah.
Because there's a whole bunch of stuff, like good places to start. And then the other thing that I would say is get really, really, really good at meeting people where they are. So if you are within an organisation that's still trying to understand the value of human centricity, not even human-centered design, but just human centricity, one of the things that we learnt probably the hard way actually, is that if you keep talking the language of human-centered design and you're not fluent in the language of the business, it can just make things a little bit more challenging in that you're not using terminology that's familiar to the other person. It's kind of like think about the terms that are shared. Like instead of using insights and empathy, perhaps use words like we're going to better understand our customer so we can align the service portfolio more directly to their needs. Stop talking about the method and start talking about the impact, the outcomes, and try and think of what those outcomes are for the person that you ultimately need to either approve the work that you're doing or collaborate with or whatever. I often talk about so I have this, I can't remember what movie it was, but it had Nicole Kidman in it, and she was like a interpreter. Maybe it was called The Interpreter. It may be called The Interpreter, but like she's an interpreter, I think, at the UN, and there's like a whole room of them, and they're interpreting what is being said in their language. And some of those people are fluent in multiple languages, right? And they can do it live, right? It's amazing. I've always been really impressed by that. But human-centered designers, I mean, I view them like that, in that if they're in a marketing forum, they need to have a little bit of an understanding of what's important for the people who are charged with that remit of, growing market share and winning business and customers and that sort of thing. If they're speaking with a tech group, they need to have some sense of understanding of what's important to that group, and how what they're doing can help them prioritize what they're working on, and how it can make an agile process run a little bit more smoothly, or whatever it might be. I think that would be a piece of advice, is to start brushing up on your multilingual skills so that you can continue to build support in your organisation.
Yeah. And if there was one system or thing that you could redesign right now, what would it be?
Procurement process. I would redesign the procurement process. I mean, obviously there's so much work that we're doing at the moment in healthcare and the justice system and all of that sort of stuff. I mean, obviously they're really meaningful places to work and to be focused in. But one of the things that I find quite challenging is the way that work gets done, in that work gets allocated to agencies, get to happen, and that's based on the fundamental assumption that it needs to be a competitive thing, right? And that there's a winner and a loser, and the procurement process is not necessarily set up that well for people who are putting in creative bids, and a lot gets lost perhaps in the filling in of the pro formas, and the pro formas are designed to work with the systems that the client partners need to work with, so everyone's caught up in it. There's no one point that is responsible for the state of it. But if there was a system that I wanted to redesign that had the potential to unlock creativity and collaboration and really, really interesting work and interesting ways of building networks in the creative industries, I'd look at the procurement system.
Awesome. And what would you recommend to the person who's writing those tenders at the moment? Where should they start?
I really love it when we get to help the person who needs to write the tender to write the tender, and part of that is because they don't know what we know and we don't know what they know, right? So we don't have the detailed understanding of the limitations within which they need to make decisions, and it has to be fair, so there's criteria that's weighted and all of that sort of stuff. That's their domain. But one of the things that's really helpful is when we can sit with them and say, for this particular project, instead of weighting it 70% on investment, the research approach and the way that that's conceived, and how they've taken a particularly citizen-centric approach to engaging people post-trauma, whatever the content is really, really important. So you should weight that, more than 10%. You should weight that 30%, 40%, whatever. And to be able to also give them a sense of what is a good response to a tender and what's not a good response to a tender. So to be able to say, look for these sorts of things, ask these types of questions. And I think again, in a competitive procurement system, trying to work out how to collaborate with a potential respondee just sort of does your head in, right? But perhaps they're not. Perhaps they, by doing that, they don't respond to the tender. But collaboration is so important in our industry. It's like, so we can't solve the challenges that face humanity with like these single perspectives. We need different worldviews, different disciplines, different ways of working. You know, I love it when there's like cognitive friction that occurs when you have two equally valid perspectives into the way a problem should be solved, and you know, a human-centered designer might be saying, oh, we need to make sure that we spend a lot of time understanding the human condition. We need to spend time with the community. We need to do all of this work and get the data and get the insights to then inform the solution or the concepts that we're going to test. Whereas another person who might come from, say, a tech innovation lens might want to just go in and start experimenting straight away, and it's through that experimentation that they're going to find out things about what's right and what's wrong. And both of those things can coexist together, but sometimes there can be this sort of eyeball to eyeball kind of cognitive friction stuff going on. And I love seeing that, because what you see is, obviously if it's done in a way where people aren't getting injured and not taking it personally and all that sort of stuff, but what you see is two powerful methodologies coming in to wrestle around being able to solve this human challenge. And if you have the right conditions to be able to have that discussion, the only thing that results out of that, I believe, is a more well-considered, holistic, robust approach. And I think we shy away from that a little bit. Sometimes we can be a little bit too nice, perhaps.
Awesome. And is there anything else that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
Not really. I just what is that? The fourth wall. Yeah, hopefully over time we'll start getting questions from people who are watching, people who follow Huddle, and use this as a really kind of simple way of having a really honest conversation about these things, and hopefully that'll help.
Great. Cool. I think
Cool.
that wraps us up.
Okay, thank